Hey, if you've got this part of the video, you've got the live unedited edition, Home Gadget Geeks. It's Thursday night. It's the 12th of September. It's 8 p.m. Oh, a little after 8 p.m. in the Central Time Zone, 9 Eastern, 7 Mountain, 6 Pacific. And if you join us any other time than that, you've caught us on the live channel, and you can just hang tight. We'll get started here in just a second. If you want to join the edited version of the podcast, you can head over to theaverageguy.tv. They're all posted there, and want to welcome you. I know a few of you came out early. John was out early. Tony is in the chat room as well, and I saw Ken a little bit earlier. Welcome, guys. If you're listening live, and there's a few of you listening live, check in the chat room. We'd love to see you there. Christian's hanging out with me tonight. Christian, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jim. Good to be back.
Always
Can't
good to.
believe we're like already close to the end of summer. Feels like we were just kicking off summer.
Yeah, it goes fast, doesn't it? It's kind of here and gone. Did you do anything unusual this summer?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. Different. We had a full-on multi-day Indian wedding in the Dominican Republic for one of my friends from school. So that was kind of a unique cultural experience and trip that we took.
Okay, hold on. A full-on Indian wedding in the Dominican Republic.
Yep.
And is it a traditional Indian wedding can be days? Was it multiple days?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it was like the full fauché, if you will, and it was about.
Well, I haven't heard that in a while. Nice callback.
Yeah, it was about 2.5 days of ceremony.
That's great. That's awesome.
And that was a really cool experience. And it was like usually destination weddings are much smaller, but it was like 150 people. It was like crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was like a lot of people.
They have a whole resort?
Yeah. Yeah. It was at the resort, which is really wild.
Well, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's cool. Well, yeah, that's unusual. I don't know if I've done anything unusual this summer. It's been a pretty good. We had last Saturday, it was supposed to be Friday, but last Saturday, about 7:00, I hear people walking on my roof. They were supposed to replace it on Friday because in June we had a huge hailstorm, just wrecked everybody's house. So everybody's getting new roofs here in Bellevue.
Okay.
And so I thought when they didn't show up on Friday, I thought maybe we'd see them Monday or Tuesday. Nope, Saturday out there. And they don't knock on the door to say they're there. Just ladders start going up and they're walking on your roof and off go the shingles. And it was they did actually a really nice job. Had it done by 3. They redid the shed, which was really, really, they put new flashing on and everything. I was like, I got done. I was like, boys, nice job. They were. And then even though typically they drop the shingles and then they bring a truck in and they lift the shingles to the roof. No, the truck didn't show up. So these poor guys, they were carrying it up. Literally, it was almost like it was an initiation. One guy was carrying up the ladder that was the tallest possible spot in my house, like literally the farthest from the roof, from the peak to the ground. And this guy was carrying these up 1 and 2 at a time on, while he's climbing up the ladder. And I was like, dudes. And I thought, I went to go pick one up after they were done. And I was like, well, how heavy can these things be? They're heavy. They are seriously heavy. So I think that's about the only exciting thing I've had done. Summer, so I got a new roof. So there you go.
Now, did insurance completely cover that?
Yeah, which is nice. And we have a pretty large deductible, but most of the roofing companies are like, we'll just do it for the price, whatever they pay, we'll do it as long as it's reasonable. And so that's done. I may need to get some new siding. We had good size hail, and it hailed for like half an hour. I have never seen hail last that long. Usually, comes down for 5 minutes and then it's kind of done. This started hailing and it just would not stop hailing. So so many trees and cars and roofs, and you get every 15 or 20 years you get a storm like that. So it was pretty wrecked, but good that's taken care of. Tony said, "Did I get a haircut? I get a haircut every couple weeks, but not recently. Maybe it's just flatter, Tony. I don't know. I showered at the gym at work. I also have been working out." John wants to know if a ready to mine Christian coin. Do you have a Bitcoin yet? Do you have a
No,
cryptocurrency, Christian?
no, I'm very old tech in this way. I've completely let the Bitcoin and associated crypto world fly by me. So
Yeah, I've been listening to the Wall Street Journal podcast. They do it twice a day, morning and afternoon, and I guess Tether has gotten real popular over the last couple years. Tether's tied to USD, but it's gotten, I guess, its popularity, and of course, folks are using it to skirt, sanctions and drug money and sex trafficking and human trafficking and all that stuff, right?
yeah.
Um, but I guess it has now daily transactions that rival Visa. So I was like, wow, I didn't realize Tether had gotten so popular. So there you go. There you go. There's your Bitcoin we don't have any other plans to talk about Bitcoin yet tonight. So
Before we jump on there, I'm
yeah,
going to go
yeah.
deal with the dog who has decided
Oh,
he's going to dumpster dive at this time.
okay. All right. We'll let you do that as you're gone. So yeah, no haircut, Tony. I have been working out at the fitness center at work. Yeah, it's making my hair a little flatter or something. I don't know. Maybe it just looks a little bit different. Tony says, I work with Indian doctors. They tell me about the Indian weddings, sometimes over 1,000 people. Yeah, in India, it can be a big deal. And it's a couple days. I work with we hired a lot of software developers from India for the last 15 or 20 years, and they'd go home to get married. It was all week. So it would be better. So Justin says, used Tether earlier this week to get money out of CoinSpot. And we chatted last week about NiceHash, and I moved that money out of NiceHash, and that landed nicely in Coinbase. So that's sitting there. So converted it to XMR for privacy, moved to another exchange, then get it in Bitcoin. Yeah, you can jump. They take a while. Those transactions can take a while to come across. So it's interesting. It eventually did get there, and it worked out for me. But they can take some time to get across. I don't think I'll probably do much more. John says got his NiceHash moved also. Thank you. You're welcome for mentioning that. Good. I don't know when they're kicking in with fees, but it sounds like it's pretty close. And yeah, Tether is fast. Tether's a fast network. That's the whole idea. As opposed to if you move Bitcoin, you're waiting a while. It can be anywhere from 4 to 24 hours to get that. And then XMR to Bitcoin swaps for about 30 minutes. Yeah. Depends what you pay. Depends on the network. Some of those kinds of things. I don't know if I'll make any more trades for the year. I think I'm kind of done at this point. I have been thinking about using crypto, my crypto account, to pay for some solar or battery improvements here in the United States right now. Those improvements are worth a 30% tax credit. So if I sold the crypto to buy batteries, and I think batteries up, they got to be a certain size. They got to be pretty large. If I did batteries or solar panels or any of those kinds of upgrades, I could take up to a 30% credit on my taxes, and that would kind of pay for the capital gains that I would incur on the crypto. So it was like, well, that may be a smart way to get that crypto out and then use it for something that's actually helpful. I do have I will, no matter what I do, take a pretty large capital gains hit when I do go to sell crypto. So, it's a strategy. Everything I've got, it's because it's in Coinbase. It's here in the U.S. It's all reported. So I've got, I think I've got all the tax stuff straightened out on that, kind of ready to go. So, but that's one tax strategy is or I had some of it that would incur quite a loss at this point. And I have to check last year's taxes to see what I took, because I took a loss on some last year that kind of helped on my taxes. So even though it's up, I had some, I'd bought some higher and it went down. So good chance to try and kind of make those tax things work in my favor. So it's always a possibility. Like we talked last week, I always go down this road with solar or batteries. And to get what I need about, on the battery side, I need about 7, 8, 9, $10,000 worth of batteries to do a whole house kind of thing. Then, solar panels, you're talking another $5,000. Well, I mean, my electricity cost is only, $1,500 a year, maybe. So you start thinking, well, I have to completely replace it. And you're at a 10 or 12 year payoff. So and then with putting the new roof on, I don't know if I really want to drill holes in my roof at this point. So, it's one of those things like, do I want to put the best place? I mean, there's some places I could put it up here, but to get the maximum value out of solar, it really needs to go on the front of the house, on the roof that faces south, front of the house. I would need to pull permits, which is not a big deal. But then I need to put, I'd have to drill right into the new roof I just put on. So I'm a little, it's kind of like I need to justify it. I really need, I really need it to work out. And yeah, Justin, I could do grid tied batteries only. Yeah, as a whole house backup, but we only lose power once a year on a brownout, and then maybe every 5 years on a major outage. That hardly justifies, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 investment in batteries to make that work, right? What the real value in that would be batteries and solar, right? To make that piece work. So I go back and forth. I just can't make the math work here in Nebraska. I just kind of go, our energy's just too cheap still. So I do.
Do you guys get gas to the house?
Yeah, natural gas.
It's the biggest thing I wish we had here.
Yeah.
Everything's electric heat pumps. Winter goes, aux heat goes. Rip electric bill.
Yeah. No, right on. Well, we had a 5-day power outage here, which got me thinking about all this stuff again. I fired up the generator. Now, like I got the bill, and it was like half of what it normally is. No, it's not probably true. Probably 2/3 of what it normally is. Plus, we installed a new air conditioner last fall that's super efficient. So it was already down a third, right? So the energy bill, the electricity is coming down, but I take 2 gas cans twice a day to fill up for the generators, dropping, it was $3.20 a gallon each time, so I'm dropping $60, $70 a day to keep the gas generators running. Right? So then you think, I didn't save me anything. No, it did keep the house cool. And I'm looking at now that I know what I know, I will probably replace I'm going to put a interlock kit so I can run a more powerful generator to the breaker panel, and then I think run our air conditioner. That's the most important thing, just getting that air conditioner running during, because the power always goes out in the summer, right? So
yeah,
it's it's a challenge. It's always a challenge to get all the stuff, because even with generators, you get to a price point that's kilowatt, right? Or that's not kilowatt. That's that's a wattage type thing. So $12,000, it seems to be about the highest in the right price point. Well, that's right on the edge of your air conditioner. Being able to, you start thinking, will that work? You need some serious watts and amps to get your compressor running on your air conditioner,
Yeah.
So anyways, lots of conversation.
I replaced that capacitor in the compressor outdoors because I had this unexplained mystery where my electric bill started shooting up to like $700, which is just beyond stupid, like over
Yeah.
double. And
Yeah. Yeah.
after a lot of failed diagnosis, eventually it was discovered that the aux heat was getting stuck on when the AC was being called. So it was basically just constant drawing, like an extra 14 amp load, but the heat wasn't actually running. It was just energizing the heater kit. And so that was just acting like a vampire. Anytime the AC was on, that thing was just also continuously
Yikes.
stuck on. So that was really nasty.
Yeah. 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 Did you repair it yourself? John said, did you, or did you have a HVAC guy come in?
I tried for like 2.5 months to repair it myself, and I replaced some things and debugged some things, and eventually was like, I'm missing something, and I got a guy in that got it.
Yeah.
And
Good.
and he
Good.
was like, here's this, several $1,000 bill to fix it. And I'm like, I'm gonna do it myself. And now it's good.
Good.
So
Good.
I
Well, that's
did
good. Yeah.
ultimately fix it myself, but I needed some higher level math in the room. So
Yeah. Well, it kind of, those new current sensing
yes.
meters that you can put on, right? I think one of them is even called current, right? I think.
Okay.
And have you thought about, since you're all electrical, have you thought about putting some smart sensing? So, because some of those things you can kind of tell where you're losing phantom power.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't, and probably only in part because Pepco has done such an excellent job of like their usage dashboards. I'm able to get
Oh,
hourly and daily data dumps from my meter. So I was able to establish timelines and usage trend patterns to identify that it was my HVAC causing me a problem. And then
yeah.
like one weekend when we went for a trip and I'm like, okay, I'm going to really confirm this. I just shut the circuits off to the HVAC while we were at the house for the weekend, and you see the power plummet. So I knew I had an HVAC problem at that point, but you're right in terms of like, I can't set up alerts through the Pepco app that tells me a sudden surge, but I do get weekly emails from them that's like, your power consumption was X percentage more or less than the week before. So like it's not real time, but for like no app or smart infrastructure, like it's pretty good.
Yeah. You can,
Um,
you can deduce some things from it, right?
yep.
Yeah. 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 Those, I've thought about putting those in, I just haven't it. And I may, this may be the right time when I'm wiring in this 50 amp breaker to bring generator power in. That maybe I've got the panel off, I've got the power off. Maybe the right time to install, you got to go, basically you got to go in and just put clamps around the two mains that are coming in, or the three mains, I guess, that are coming in. So, yeah, maybe it's, I don't know. It's another thing. It's another thing to obsess about, you know?
Yeah.
Another dashboard to watch. All right. Anyways, let's kick this thing off here. Christian, thanks for coming out here. Thanks for letting us be a little late, and we'll kick this thing off. Here we go. This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geeks, show number 622 with guest Christian Johnson, recorded on September 12th, 2024. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home, news, reviews, product updates, and conversation, all for the average tech guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the Average Guy.tv studios. And here, thank goodness, I think fall is on its way. We had our last bit of heat. Christian, you and I were talking about. Do you think you're in Maryland, the Maryland area? Are we done, or do you think we're fall is
Shockingly,
on
I
its way?
really am surprised. Last year we made it pretty close to October before the heat started to dissipate, but this year was a little bit earlier.
Yeah, sure feels like it. Although I'm looking at the weather right now across next week, and it's a steady 89, 88, 89. So who knows? We're just really dry at the moment. My lawn has already started to go dormant. And you're like, do you water it this late in the year? You know?
No,
Right?
no.
It's a thing. Because you're like, seriously, it's gonna go dormant because of the cold in the next
Yep.
month or 2. Might as well just but it's so painful. It is so painful to watch my grass go dormant. Well, anyways.
Are you good at actually having that, like, premium green turf that everyone aspires to, or is your
Right.
grass like? Because my grass is like an amalgamation of God knows what, and we call it
Oh,
grass.
yeah, up front, it's almost so out front, it's almost I'd say it's 80% Zoysia, and when you get that just perfect, it's a carpet, and
Mm,
it's soft. You could sleep on it. It
mm.
is so in fact, my neighbor on the 4th of July passed out on it. So he was that comfortable, and, he'd been drinking a little bit. But, so yeah, I think, is it perfect? No. Is it nice? Yes. But Zoysia also goes dormant and goes brown. As soon as it goes
Mm.
brown, you are brown for the rest of the winter, right? And so which I'm fine with, but this kind of early dry hot weather will force it to go dormant, and then, I just miss out on a few. I could usually keep it kind of green till maybe like November if we had some rain. I think it's too late. I was looking at it today. It's already browning. So I was like, well, all right. Well, anyways, and I just don't want to put water on it. But with that, we'll post this, all the links you need for tonight. Some world class show notes at theaverageguy.tv. I've been using a bunch of AI to make those show notes pretty awesome. So, which I think is what AI is for. Like it
Jim
takes
has fully embraced it.
Listen, AI what AI is really good at is taking a whole bunch of information and kinda condensing it down and summarizing it, and then what it gives you actually makes sense.
Yeah.
You kinda go, "Huh." So if you haven't checked out the show notes in a while, I'm running 2 different versions of the show times, so I kind of an outline with times and then an expanded outline with times, so if you wanna see what we talked about, you can go in there. I get some summaries and talk about products that we talked about. Christian, this another area AI has been helpful to me on is tell me all the products we talked about during the show, and it
Oh,
it
wow.
it freaking nails it. Like it's
Very
like
cool.
boom, like by like Black and Decker or Anchor or whatever, right? Bam, HP. Remember when you used to be so hard on HP?
I think I still am in a weird way, but yes, I remember it fondly.
There's a
Um,
long time ago, there's an episode where we beeped out you talking about HP, and it was just you weren't really swearing, but it was
yeah, but it
super
was a funny reel.
funny.
But I don't remember if we talked about it last time, but, it's funny because I think of HP in a different light now in the sense that the retail side of HP split up into Hewlett Packard and then Hewlett Packard Enterprise, right?
Right,
So
right.
HPE really kind of took on the like server and enterprise grade market and, competes directly with Dell PowerEdge. Um, and oh my gosh, from a market analysis standpoint, I kind of backed into this a whole different way because it is super interesting to see how investors right now are weighing these server and hardware companies. So, like SCMI went to the moon, right? Supermicro, and they were a company that, like, we probably talked about. Gary and I probably talked on some early shows of home tech about building servers with Supermicro motherboards, which
Yeah,
was like
yeah,
that was kind of countercultural at the time in a sense. They weren't nearly as big of a company. Um, and it's been so fascinating to see the AI trade, dump big money in and out of Supermicro. But Dell has really been kind of a shining star in this space as well. And so it's like you see Dell and SCMI kind of duking it out in certain ways, and then it's like HPE's kind of like it's there, but they're not seeing nearly the level of movement and order volume on the AI server, which is kind of like a segment now within the
yeah,
enterprise, like
yeah,
build
for
your own
sure.
AI server and deploy it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it is very interesting to see SMCI be the cool kid on the block, which I used to think Dell was, but Dell is kind of the steady workhorse in the enterprise, not just retail. And I I've really been impressed with their quality over the long term, not just with the advent of AI, but even prior to that, Dell has just had a solid product, whereas HP is like you pay a little bit less in the short run, but you pay a lot more in the long run. And I mean, I don't know if you guys remember when we used to dissect and take apart on the retail side of HP. We would buy these first generation Intel i7 CPUs that would have the Pegatron motherboard, which was basically the Taiwanese company that was manufacturing motherboards for HP at the time. And we RMA'd a single desktop, I think 3 different times. And it got so bad that like we were getting free computers out of the deal, free keyboards were showing up every other week. Like HP was desperate to get us out of their RMA shop because you'd get it in, it'd last a couple of weeks. The next reason it would break would be there. And then it was like a rinse and repeat. And I'm not saying it's nearly as bad, but I mean, you kind of see some of that weakness in the Proliant brand that you just don't see with the Dell or Supermicro. But it's interesting because just like you have all of this hardware push, and especially like custom AI chips in cloud computing environments, and that can be anything from something like an Amazon to, NVIDIA's cloud for their GPU environments. As much as that infrastructure is available and readily available to the enterprise, people are still like, yeah, but I want to build my own. And so Dell and Supermicro have pretty nice seats at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. That's a good synopsis on that. Joe says there's a special place in hell for those HP Office Jet
100%.
and NV series printers.
100%.
Tony says still using Dell monitors. I have 3 Dell monitors here, a Dell there. I guess 4 Dell monitors. Yeah, I got 4 Dell monitors down in the part of the 11 series here. They've somehow done a nice job, and these are all older, they're 5, 6, 7 years old. They've just kind of held on. I kind of was waiting for them to die. Joe says been impressed with how frequently Dell updates the firmware on the Optiplex desktops. Even those are sold as 8th gen. So yeah. Well, not what we came to talk about tonight, but something. Do you need to get the dog? Is that a dog? Is dog okay?
Dog is alerting at something to which he is no longer alerting. So how we'll edit that out afterwards
no
remains to be seen.
We're gonna leave it in. Big thanks to our Patreon subscribers as well. If you join the team and you're on Patreon, thanks for your support every month. You can join that at theaverageguy.tv/Patreon. And then don't forget, I've put the all the affiliate links, and there's just really one that's important, but I can't say the name. So if you want to go out there and click through that link and go to it, we have it, but they don't want me to advertise it. So I'm not going to say the name, but if you're shopping at the biggest retail shopping place on the internet and you want to click through, that click through supports the show here. There's a link upper right-hand corner without saying the name. Check it. Listen, over the last couple of months, I've been talking about this. Many of you have. Thanks for doing that. And thanks for getting that done. I appreciate it. Big thanks to Jay Franzi, who hung out with us last week, and that was a fun show. Jay, thanks for coming on. Christian, great to have you back on the show. You need to plan early December, 14th anniversary of Home Gadget Geeks.
Let's go.
Right. And you mentioned some home tech stuff that we had talked about. I mean, just in the beginning of this show, we talked about HP. We used to talk about that all the time. BIOS mods. What's the status of BIOS mods?
It's still there. It's still running. It's still doing its thing.
Do that? Is that a thing?
I don't get any time for it anymore, but there's plenty of folks that stay super busy in the forums. So I host it. I let it rip. People do their thing. It's still cranking. I mean, the number of people that have been helped or gotten their firmware fixed or been able to bring old motherboards back to life with new CPUs, like get the latest microcode, like it's still, the magic is still alive and well. So if you have some, crazy old pet project, that site probably is a weird home for you.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my favorite memories of ways that BIOS modding helped me was, I'm sure many show listeners of yesteryear remember our obsession with converting the HP MediaSmart servers from a single core Intel Celeron to a quad core Intel, which was a huge freaking deal at the time because the Media Smart servers were like the original SKU was that single core like 1.6 gigahertz Celeron with like I think the default was 512 gigs of RAM, and that was the first like Windows Home Server 2006 or whatever. And then like you were super lucky if you got a dual core at some point with like a gig. But they never formally made a quad core because the biggest downside, if you will, of that form factor was it struggled with heat. So really cool concept. Toaster server in your house. It's gonna forever live in the history books as a fond time. But its biggest weakness or its Achilles heel was it would eat through drives. I mean,
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
keep popping in 2 terabyte drives, and after a few years, the heat would get one or more of them. But we we successfully worked with the community and got microcode in to get full quad core Intel CPUs working with like 4 gigs of RAM. It was absolutely monumental. We were able to get enterprise versions of Windows Server running. So like even after home server kind of died, the hardware was still enough that you could run an actual server on it. And that was not just a trivial feat in terms of modifying firmware images, but you also needed to get that special adapter that some of you may remember that Alex Kurtz and company used to sell, where it let you plug in directly onto one of the jumper pins on the motherboard to get a VGA and a keyboard video mouse output. And that was the vector that allowed us to basically boot the motherboard, have it find the USB image, figure out the secret handshake keystroke to put the thing in recovery mode, and get it to flash the custom BIOS. And I'll have it reboot and miraculously go from I'm not going to touch the CPU to, yeah, there's the Windows login screen. So yeah, BIOS mods is alive and well. It's done everything from that original tablet I used to have, the netbook, the Asus netbook. It's done everything from that. Media Smart servers, any number of laptops, you name it. A lot of cool hack projects that are a result of people learning how to make their BIOS work for them.
Yeah. You still have a article on the front page. By the way, bios-mods.com.
Yeah.
You are the author. I'm pretty sure that's you. You are the author from 2012, BIOS Spotlight UEFI Dell XPS 15 L511Z out there. I mean, listen, if you're into this and you didn't know BIOS-mods existed, there is there are some reviews out there. There are some things going on. Make sure you check the dates on the
Yes.
list.
Now, what I will say is what's absolutely amazing about this site is if you're on the homepage, nothing has been touched since 2014. And you're like, wow, this site must be totally dead. But if you look in the RSS feed on that same homepage and you go into the forums, there are tons of new posts and discussion happening every day. And so, yeah.
The forums are much like Home Server Show. The forums are where it's at. The forums lived way longer than the blog the blog site did for Dave. And then he just recently shut that down. So John says, just saw from the notes from Home Gadget Geeks where Christian graduated from high school. Oh yeah, man, I remember. Yeah. Wow. Shoot, I was there when you graduated from college. Like,
yeah, we've done
I got
high
the
school.
opportunity to come out and spend some time with you and see the family and Ashton and have that graduation time together. Those are some sweet moments. That's a while ago already, right? I mean, what? Not 18? Was it 2018? 17. Jeez.
Yeah.
Holy buckets. Well, Christian, you and I have been doing this a long time, and tons of fun because the technology just keeps going. Like it's I always kept thinking like, we said everything we needed to say. Well, let's pick on your specialty, CrowdStrike happened a couple
What
weeks
happened?
back, right? And it seemingly it feels like we've recovered from it right now. The airlines had some trouble, and I'm sure there were some deeper problems with it. But can you go back, give me your quick rundown on from your perspective on that whole situation?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because it happened a few weeks before I went out to DEF CON, which you want to talk about another time tradition. I think this was the 9th year in a row of DEF CON, so that was something. But CrowdStrike was interesting because it had all the trappings of like kind of a major cybersecurity incident, but it had nothing to do with security, or did it? And what I mean by that is, wasn't a data breach, wasn't, your kind of bread and butter exploit or 0 day, but it was really unique.
Malicious
Yeah,
actors. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. But it was really unique in the sense that it had the scale of impact of something like that without it being a security problem, and it really being a software engineering problem. And I kind of love that story because it's near and dear to my heart, that most security problems stem from bad software engineering and bad quality control. And so, you know, the basic outframe and outline of the CrowdStrike incident is that, um, from a Microsoft standpoint, this affected less than 1% of their user base, or something close to 1%. So 8.5 million devices, which sounds like a huge number, but in relation to all the Windows devices out there, not a huge number. But um, CrowdStrike has really grown, I'd say, especially in the last 5 years, as a major, major cybersecurity provider for the Fortune 500 and a lot of big firms. So, um, people saw impact not because of the number of devices impacted, but because of how much critical infrastructure deploys and uses CrowdStrike to help defend that critical infrastructure. And so I'm sure many people, from a social standpoint, know what happened because they couldn't make their airline reservation on time, or they couldn't book their ticket. But that's, one really good example of where, you have entire industries that use Windows, and the systems are very custom built, and they rely on specific key vendors like CrowdStrike. Um, it's really funny getting into some of this because if you compare like a Delta Airlines to a Southwest Airlines, what was the only difference between an airline that was paralyzed for weeks and an airline that wasn't? Well, Southwest hasn't gotten off Windows 3.1. I'm not joking. Like, they are still on like window. I think some of it's 3.1 and some of it's like NT, but it is like order of the ancient stuff that they use for their ticketing, which like blows your mind when you think about like, go to the website for Southwest, go to the website of Delta, and like from a front end facade standpoint, you as a user aren't going to know that. But on the back ends, I mean, these back ends are very customized, very detailed, using specific, vendors. So that's very interesting to me. Um, the short story on CrowdStrike is that, they have a product called their Falcon sensor, which basically provides device protection, and it's the whole 9 yards. So it can observe and detect malicious activity on that device. It can connect to their cloud-based services and endpoint services to um, share data and help stop threats in its tracks. I mean, it's, CloudStrike and its leadership team, very well respected in the industry, very well understood. Um, but what's interesting about this is the QA story, number one. Number two, what is good about that QA story was that I think CrowdStrike owned up to it straight away, which is really rare to see in the industry, that they're just like, yeah, we made a mistake. We're going to have to learn from it. And number three is, it's really this fascinating story about what happens when you get keys to the kingdom, if you will. And so, Microsoft as an operating system has a very interesting set of design patterns. One of those design patterns is that, um, you as a vendor can get very sensitive access to the Windows operating system layer if you are allowed to install device drivers for your software. Now, typically we think of drivers as, hey, make my mouse work, make my webcam work, etc. But in order for something like this level of AV and malware protection to work properly, it has to get very privileged level of access to the kernel to do its job. And so Microsoft has a policy that for drivers requiring that level of kernel access, they need to go through the WHQL program, which means that all the drivers are supposed to be signed. They're all supposed to go through a certification process. And that, in theory, is what allows a vendor to basically get kernel mode access, or what they call ring 0, which is another fancy term for just you have full control of the PC. And so what's interesting about this is that, number one, there was a bug in how CrowdStrike interacts with the kernel that didn't get caught properly. And actually, that's a story in and of itself, because they ran it on 2 different systems, and one system passed and the other system said it had a problem, and the patch got pushed anyway and started causing a bunch of problems. But 2, what's interesting is that these types of changes that were pushed out didn't seem to have gone through the WHQL process. So it means, like, once that driver was in place and had that level of kernel access, they were pushing basically patches through that privilege channel that were faulty. And so that's really interesting, because there's a lot of open-ended questions on, like, why did the WHQL process and that certification standard not catch this bug? And then, that's supposed to be a Microsoft level protection because of the way the operating system is designed. And then there's kind of this second level question of, like, why did CrowdStrike's quality assurance and test process not catch it before they even submitted it as an update file within what they call their rapid response content system? And so it's really interesting, because in many respects, what CrowdStrike is following as a software methodology is very much kind of continuous development, continuous integration, which is kind of this buzzword for doing agile software development with small incremental releases that get tested automatically, and you build confidence as you work from kind of your development stage and environment through your pre-production, through your integration out to your production. It's a little unique in the sense that it's not like they are patching a server or a software application or something that runs on their back end. They're patching something with a full CD process that is on an endpoint or on a client device. And so working this privileged level in the kernel, if you get something wrong that is a catastrophic failure, you are going to B-side. So, on the surface, when this event's happening, it's kind of hard to distinguish, like, oh, is this another bad Microsoft update that rolled out, or is this another issue going on? And that gets to kind of this difference in design paradigm between the operating systems, right? Like, CrowdStrike runs on Linux, Mac, Windows, doesn't matter, and yet we don't have these problems on Linux and Mac. They're developed a little bit differently. Now, there was an earlier event where this did happen in a Linux type environment, but it didn't result in crashing the OS. It basically does what's called a kernel panic, but it has a lot more graceful recovery modes than what you see in Windows. And so there's this kind of interesting sentiment and thought about how Windows as an operating system has been developed over the years, and what level of different integrations are required for third-party software to be successful in that ecosystem. So there's kind of this Microsoft aspect of how do they protect their brand and their software in their environment. And then there's this, second level of question around how do the actual third-party vendors, in this case CrowdStrike, do the same before integrating. But what's really interesting about the event from a kind of what was the bottom line impact is that a lot of economic impact, much as if this was like a distributed denial of service attack or something, very similar to just a traditional cyber event. I think Delta Airlines sued Microsoft, interestingly, in their choice of who to sue, for $500 million for the event, which just shows you the level of economic damage that happened to one company during this time frame. And many other companies and industries rely on this. So large economic damage, large blast radius, things were down for a long period of time. Even like 2 weeks after this thing was done and patches issued, and the whole village, so to speak, coming out to try to fix this incident. I'm still walking through the BWI airport on the way out to DEF CON and seeing the BSOD screens on some of the terminals that hadn't not yet gotten their patching done, right? So pretty crazy. It checked all the boxes for looking like a cyber event, but really it's just the story and how important software assurance and quality control is in order to have an effective product and ultimately have a secure product, because in many ways you're strong as your weakest link. And in this case, if you have weak source code or weak quality assurance testing, it's going to be as sad of a time as if you have a cyber incident. But many of these cyber incidents are in part caused by the same thing. Oops, there's a bug. And so this kind of narrative and event really helps bridge the gap, I think, for people who maybe see software engineering and cybersecurity as different industries to go into if they have a CS degree or otherwise. But this just shows how intertwined and interrelated the two fields are.
Do you think it was worse than a cyber attack in some ways because it was hitting such trusted space on the Windows side of things?
It's interesting. I think the worst part about it was the blast radius, and the blast radius certainly was the largest outage in history in terms of a per device impact. But perhaps the only thing that makes it slightly better than as bad as being breached is that, like, if you're breached, if you have been exploited, you don't know what the long tail in that tent is, right? Like, the next thing could be pay me $40 billion. The next thing could be like, oh, the malware was planted and no one found it for another 2 years. Like, you're going to go on a wild adventure ride, cleaning up some of the more nastier types of exploits and compromises. At least with something like this, the damage assessment is controlled, and it's somewhat of a fixed complexity in the sense that they're going to figure out what they did and how it got screwed up when they rolled it out. And then teams are going to work really hard to roll it back and restore service. So there's a lot less boogeymen waiting to jump out at you once an event like that happens, compared to, an actor of some kind has owned you and now you're like, uh-oh, what's next?
Yeah. What kind of ransomware follows this, or what kind of data has been compromised? In some regards, it happened at a time when, from my own personal experience, it happened on a Thursday night. We were getting ready to do the podcast. There was someone, maybe it was Justin, I forget who it was, had put in chat. They were starting to see some things happen.
Yeah.
But there were actually two events. There was kind of an Azure outage that had happened before this. And I don't know if that was related to it or not. And then CrowdStrike came. And by the time we got into work on Friday morning, a lot of the folks I work with had been in all night doing things to make sure when folks tried to sign in the next morning, they didn't get the blue screen or whatever that I think it was a blue screen that popped up for him. And I went in and worked out and that morning I went in and worked out. And then by the time I got back home to sign in, they had fixed everything. And I was able, turn my laptop on, it connected, it did this thing, never pushed. Like, I don't think I ever get, because my laptop was off all night, I never think I got pushed that, and it never got deployed in. Now, certainly our friends in Asia, they're the most vulnerable because it happens there first, and then it worked its way into Europe, and then then we see it here in the United States. So, do you think it? I mean, because the sun rolls that way, do you think that's a benefit to the United States to be the last? Yeah, right? In some of these day settings, right, where maybe that matters. I don't know, any thoughts on that? Does that benefit us at all?
Maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly when you talk about like tangential topic around like continuity of operations, and you have teams in different locations that can kind of give you continuity in your enterprise. Certain teams are going to see things first, and then they can kind of prepare and triage that for handoff when the next set of time zones come online. So it's a similar methodology in the sense that I think the roaring beast of the enterprise is at its peak function when everyone is in business hours. And so by getting some of that triage happening in other time zones before your time zone roars into business hours is definitely a bit of a heads up.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, those folks were in all night. They
Oh,
got
yeah.
word, 10, 11 o'clock, like, hey, we've got some problems here. And that rolled out pretty fast. But I mean, good on them. Many of those things had been fixed and repaired, or temporary measures had been put in place, whatever that means, right? To make sure that didn't get everybody. If you tried to sign in at 4 a.m., well, chances are you're getting the package.
Mm-hmm.
Your laptop was going to blue screen, and you'd have to do some things to. Ironically, I didn't get back to the studio PCs, so I have a couple PCs, a couple Windows 10, older stuff. The studio doesn't require a lot of power, so we use some desktop stuff, and they they were both blue screened. And so I called my tech team, and they're like, by the time I got to it, I didn't get to it for 3, 4, 5 days afterwards. And I went in there to do some work, and I turned on the monitors. I'm like, oh yeah, that happened. And because they rebooted at some point that night, I think we've got some kind of morning reboot thing that goes out. They picked up whatever had been deployed, and so they went through some processes of changing the what's the key? What's the BitLocker? Updating some BitLocker stuff and making that all work, and then they came right back. They came right back to life. And they were fine. So we didn't have much. Those things, they were up within 10 minutes, maybe 15 by the time the remote one of the techs came in remote. I'm like, hey, like, I got the blue screen. Oh, but by that time they were so good at it. I mean, they had done it 1,000 times, I'm sure. Right.
Yeah.
For folks that it happened to. Other thoughts?
I mean, the other thing that's interesting is that it could have happened to anyone, in the sense that even Microsoft could have done it to themselves, right? Like Windows Defender, for example, has a very similar model for how they do their cloud-based malware protection now, which is kind of built into Windows. I mean, Defender has become so embedded, you don't even think about it. It just does its thing in the background.
Yeah.
And so I think it is another unique demonstration of how fragile the internet can be, I guess, more generically, right? The fragility of what does it look like when your supply chain for these major companies are all relying on one big name. And so there's a fair number of other players in this space, right? You have Sophos, you have SentinelOne, you have ESET, you have Malwarebytes, you have Bitdefender, you have Microsoft, you have Palo Alto. So like, there's a lot of other names. CrowdStrike certainly has created a big brand and reputation, which is why they are deployed where they are. But yeah, you have to think about kind of that fragility of supply chain, and software supply chain and software supply chain security are huge challenges right now that there are not, just like I don't think there are strong answers yet for how you secure your training models for AI. I still think how you secure your software supply chain is going to just be this pervasive problem that we don't solve anytime soon. Sure, there's all sorts of companies that have all sorts of ways to try to address the problem from some particular angle or vantage point. But, the bottom line is that it is a pretty hard problem. And not just from a quality assurance standpoint, but from like you know, this was fortunately a QA issue with the software. It could have just as easily had been that something got slipped into the software supply chain and caused a similar event. And then probably there would have been bigger fallout, because even though, let's say, the impact would have been the same, the way in which it happened would have freaked a lot of people out. And so, um, thinking about that software supply chain and how we take dependencies as an industry is really eye-opening, and I think is a challenge that is very often abstracted from
Mhm.
kind of common view. But certainly, you know, I don't think anyone would have built the internet the way it was if we got to design it from scratch today. But when you just see how much of these add-ons and nuts and
Yeah.
bolts there are that we've built to kind of keep the thing running, um, that doesn't stop with network and infrastructure challenges. It extends into that whole software ecosystem, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah. Could it have been worse? Like, could it have been destructive?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, a good example might be like if your driver somehow has a bad interaction with another driver in the kernel space, you corrupt, let's say, a RAID driver gets knocked offline as a result of like somehow you're violating memory space within the kernel. That can cause data damage and destruction of loss of data. Um, so it could have been worse. My scenario probably takes a lot more to go wrong for something like that to happen, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. It certainly could have been more devices. So, one of the things that I haven't, put together in my own research or CrowdStrike yet is how many devices got it and how quickly they got it. So, like, we know 8.5 is the bottom line, but like, what was the trajectory? Like, was it a step function? Was it a nice smooth curve? Was it all over the place? And so that would be really interesting, because amplification is a real problem, right? Like if you don't gradually roll out and stage your deployments, yeah, bad things are going to happen. You're going to have stuff that falls through the cracks. But like one of the lessons learned you'd want to see coming out of this was like potentially, hey, I have CrowdStrike agent running in all these places, and we're starting to notice some sensors are going off from our customers all of a sudden. Maybe we need to pause this rollout and make sure it's not us, right? Which is kind of hard thing to do when you don't own the end device, right? Like you
Yeah.
own the
Yeah.
software on the device,
Yeah.
but this is
Yeah.
very different space than like deploying a software application in your own infrastructure. Completely different ball game, because yeah, it is a software application as a service, but it's someone else's device. That's a hard space to get that deployment and rollout strategy right. Um, but say operational safety and best practices, like we would like and we would hope that if QA failed like it did here, that there would be earlier signs and detections in the production space, if you will. Production's a
Mhm.
little bit hard to define here because it's just the end consumer, but
Right. Right.
that there would be some early warning signs that, hey, something may have gone wrong. Let's pause or roll back or, you know, get the hell out of Dodge. And it's hard to tell if that happened here or not. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly, people scrambled to the patch and started giving guidance to say, like, stop or do this or don't do that. But, like, that's different than having machines make automated decisions based on signals saying, hey, something might be wrong.
Do you think we could get to that spot
Oh,
where
yeah, absolutely.
we're we're smarter about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, um, this is a space I spend a lot of time thinking about as a software engineer. Like, how do we do safe enterprise deployments and rollbacks? So certainly it's doable, but I think probably needs to be a little bit of a culture shift for this particular scenario of like, hey, you own the platform, but not the end device it's being deployed to. That's a bit trickier, a bit more niche. But these are, yeah, these are solvable problems. A big part of it is how much you're able and willing to invest to get that level of robustness and automation in your deployments. And not all companies are able or willing to make the level of investment needed to have that type of sophistication.
Yeah. Well, it all becomes a cost benefit, exercise. You and I were talking about before we started the show, or maybe the beginning. I can never remember where the pre-show ends
Yeah.
and where the show begins. But in the previous 2 shows, I've been talking about bringing some batteries in or backup power for the house, and there's a lot of things I can do as I've been reviewing, things I could do. I can spend easily, realistically, $10,000-$15,000 to make sure I've got pretty good backup here, even a whole house where I could back up just about everything. It's possible today for, 20,000. But then you kind of go, but do I need that much backup for what's happening every 5 years? And so I think there's this cost analysis that goes on sometimes in this space of like, hey, how much is it worth spending to make sure we have 100% coverage? In this case, this is pretty bad. Do you think back in the day, Melissa, that's kind of the very first, virus, so to speak, that goes mainstream, right? We get better because I think we get better because of that, right? It increases consumers' awareness of it and some of these things. In this kind of situation, do you think we'll get better? Will changes happen so that they don't have zero access, zero level access to the kernel? There are APIs that exist that they could be using that for the same thing that don't require zero level. This has been going on for a while with Windows. It is one of those kinds of things where it's happening. I'm sure somebody wanted to fix this at some point, but it kept getting pushed off. You know how that goes. That's too much work to rewrite all those things. We'll just wait and see what happens. Will we get better because of this, Christian?
I hope so, until it's the next thing, right? One thing that is very real is how much tech debt you carry in an organization and how much you choose to carry forward and what you choose to burn down. When you've decided to have some real honesty with yourself and declare tech debt bankruptcy and start all over again. So there are certainly I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we've had and will continue to have, and I think it does generally make us better, but I do think a lot of these systems are operating at a level of complexity now that just the sheer reach of the size of this stuff, and that stuff being the operating systems, the data models, the cloud infrastructure, the endpoint software, the training models, like it's a whole lot of stuff. And so a lot of the principles of how to do, excellent software engineering and have an operationally excellent service or product or thing, like these are not new concepts. And we've learned a lot from past incidents across the spectrum as industry. But past volume of incidents doesn't necessarily predict future volume of incidents. And a really good example of this, totally sidebar, but a good example of quality is a function of time that you can plot on a graph. Is like we've had really excellent safety standards for the longest time in aviation in the United States. And it's really fascinating to watch us have a lot more incidents and near misses and cringeworthy ATZ videos. And, just this last few days, there was 2 Delta airplanes backed up into each other and wiped out the tail. I mean, stuff that, I think we've learned how to safely do a lot of this stuff. We've operated safely for decades in some of these areas, and then all of a sudden we're having major problems. Well, why is that? And in the case of the airline industry, there's a whole sidebar of issues that can explain that. But I think the takeaway is that this is not a problem that you burn down in a traditional sense, because as you solve it in some of these areas, all these new domains open up that in
Mhm.
some ways seem to have to keep relearning the same lessons as they get
Mhm.
kind of stood up and
Yeah,
established. So,
yeah.
um, hard to say.
Well, successful safety in itself is a problem in that you
Yes.
begin to get complacent, right? You've been like, yeah, we haven't had an accident in 30 years. And then people change, things change, processes change
Mhm.
to the point where you're like, well, why do we even need that rule anymore?
Yeah.
Like it's such a hassle to have to do this, whatever that rule is. We forget, right? We collectively as an entity, we collectively forget that's oh, we had this because of this, of whatever reason it was. There was a reason we put this in place, and we're not it's we're reminded of that when two planes back into each other, like, oh yeah, that's why we didn't do those
Yeah.
kinds of things that way. That makes sense. Everybody will go back to an old rule and say, well, why aren't you following this rule that you put in place 30 years ago? And you say, well, because history, like the relative safety we had led us to some complacency. I think that's oftentimes a hard thing to break out of, right? You get
Yeah.
this consistent success, and then you're like, well, maybe we don't need that rule anymore. And maybe you don't, but maybe you do, until you need it. You don't need it until you do, I guess, is one of the things there. Joe in chat says, anyone remember the blaster worm, circa
Yeah.
2003-ish, right? I
Yeah.
think that eventually led to the addition of the Windows firewall. Well, I mean, there was a whole safe computing initiative that Bill Gates put in at Microsoft with all those. I mean, that was that era, right? The post post 9/11 up until maybe 2006, something like that. That seems like a period. By the way, for those, it's crazy. We just yesterday was the anniversary of 9/11, and do remember all those folks affected by that. It seems like a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago, but certainly an event that shaped the nation. There'll be some things that came out of that, Christian, that some rules that were put. It's probably already happening. Rules that were put in place that will be like, why do we do that? And then
Mhm.
right, and then you forget. You're like, well, we shouldn't do that anymore. That'll never happen. And then of course it does. So one of those kinds of things. Anything else you'd add to that discussion, Christian?
Um, no, I mean, just so much of this is as much a human psychology problem
Yeah,
as it is a
for sure.
technical one,
It
and
is
I always
absolutely.
have
Yeah.
to remind myself that
Mhm.
when developing with dozens of developers working on hard problems, that a lot of times it's not the technical problem that's the hard one to solve. It's how you get all the people kind of rallied around working and engaging in that problem. And so
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
technology still really does have a human element that is very underappreciated at this point. But in the enterprise, you probably spend as much, if not a little bit more time solving the human aspects of the challenge as you do the technical, and I don't think that's any different in this instance.
Yeah. Listen, as long as we're biological, we're going to have those. That's going to exist in some way. And, you often wonder, okay, in the scenario where the Terminator scenario where the computers take over and they create their own culture and stuff, you kind of wonder, would a machine based culture be any better than a biological based culture? Would they have their lazy things that they would do? Would they have machines that would go rogue against the other machines? Would there be situations where they get lazy or they don't? You got to kind of wonder how far. We always think of the machine scenario as being the perfect scenario. And you kind of wonder, I mean, we're not, even as biological entities, we're still a bunch of chemical reactions of things that happen, right? It's not magic, it's not witchcraft that drives us. They're just chemical reactions in our brain, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, would a machine culture do any better? Do you think it might have
No.
some of the same problems that we have?
Yeah.
Just
I
I
mean,
hadn't really thought about that, but
You
You're
have
like,
to, I guess you have to make an assumption about whether or not those machines have reached some type of general intelligent state or
yeah,
not. But,
yeah.
even if
I
they
guess
have,
I'm assuming they have something, right?
yeah, but if you
In
assume
that.
they operate with some slight level of defect and they can do that at scale, perhaps that's going to add up a whole lot quicker.
Yeah, just think about how a defect could spread, and how a AI decision to, well, we've had success in this area for so long. We're no longer going to watch this area that has a vulnerability. It doesn't know. And so then a vulnerability creeps in. I mean, code in some ways can act like a virus, right?
Hmm.
It can act like a chemical process, and it can morph and change within itself, especially as we're using AI to write code. You think about how that AI component may write code two different ways based on the input that it gets from it. Could it create its own virus that runs rampant through the machine culture and
Hmm.
causes the machines to get sick? Like, all of a
Yeah,
sudden you kind of go, I just think we have this perfect view of machines taking over the
we,
earth, and you're
we
kind
do.
of like, and you're like, I don't know if that actually is going to work the way we think it is. I think they're going to, there'll be machines that want to rule over other machines. you know, there'll be machines that think they're more important than other machines. You kind of wonder if that's we always think it'll be this super efficient communist kind of run where everything's fair and all those kinds of things. And you're like, I don't know if the machines would work that way. We don't, right? And certainly, I mean, what keeps us alive as humans are all those, our selfish tendencies is what keeps us alive sometimes. Otherwise, we'd just jump off things, or we'd throw ourselves in front of things, right? That selfish tendency is what keeps us alive. You kind of
Yeah.
wonder if you give a machine this desire to live, does it start making selfish decisions? Anyways, it's
Well, we get back
you
into the whole Turing tests, and I'm
for
trying to
sure,
remember the one for
for sure.
self-preservation instinct, but yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's all those things, and they're like, well, they would be, well, they wouldn't have those things, and you're like, well, then they wouldn't be autonomous. They wouldn't be able to, they'd struggle with some of those things. So, anyways, well, it'll be interesting, the fallout from some of this. I'll be honest, from a consumer perspective, this kind of came and went. I am sure there are things going on behind the scenes to button this thing up, right?
Oh yeah,
But it
absolutely.
does seem like it's off the radar. Now, it probably helps that we're in an election cycle and we're 56 days away from a major election, and
Yeah.
things are crazy here in the United States. So I'm sure there's other things to think about coming off of a Tuesday debate and all those other things. We This is maybe conveniently getting quieted behind the scenes. Hopefully there's some folks
Yes, but you're
working
absolutely
on it.
right. An event like this takes probably a full year to really
Yeah.
get fully
Yeah, and maybe a half a
digested and
decade to get adjusted, right? I mean, you
yep.
think about, okay, so if it's kernel access that's the problem and we raise that to an IPI or a API level,
Hmm.
then how long does that take to rewrite all that code? And does it work?
Yep.
Does it
Yeah.
actually protect in some regards, right? We have TPM and UEFI that was in theory supposed to stop some of these things right now,
Hmm.
because they had zero level access. It was most favored nation status. It was an ally. Sure, come on in. Welcome to the kernel, right?
Yep.
So, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Well,
that's fascinating because it's actually it comes back to like really old design decisions too, like the fact
uh,
like Windows registry used to be such a problem for like stability of Windows XP. It didn't take much corruption in the registry to like ruin the OS, but like the design or concept of a registry doesn't exist nearly in the same way in Linux and Mac. It's a completely different
right, right.
no real equivalent concept, right? And so it's just examples of, we had these ideas 30 plus years ago at this point that still are part of like how we run these modern systems today. And that's really crazy when you think about it. And there's no easy way to rip it out. Like the
No.
amount of cost and investment to do that is way beyond what it is to just live with it and make it better.
Do you think this is an argument that goes back and forth all the time, but if say magically you could replace everything that's Windows based with a Mac OS and it worked, blah blah. How long do you think before we'd start seeing exploits? I mean, and these kinds of things, right? I mean, inherent to the system, to the Windows system. I mean, partly because of technical debt and design problems and some like history, right?
Right.
But part of it is because it's so pervasive, right? Out
Yes,
there, there's
absolutely.
so much of it out there.
Yeah.
I think so
Like
many things are built around it.
if you have a limited amount of time and you have to pick, how am I going to get an exploit to have the most reach possible, you're going to pick the platform that has the largest user base, because that's where you're going to get low hanging fruits of like people who haven't patched their operating systems enough, or people who are running it embedded, and people who are running really, like 3 versions ago Windows but connected to the internet. You're going to get all of that joy by going after the big ones. And so it doesn't make sense for you as an adversary to in many cases try to target something that is a small user base, because this is a
Yeah.
game of probabilities. Your probabilities are going to be substantially lower going after the smaller ecosystems.
Yeah. You taught me a long time ago. It's about the footprint. How
Yep.
big is the footprint? And it's about reducing that, but also thinking about the footprint of the operating system itself
Yes.
and how giant that is versus some of the other ones that are out there. And Linux is probably not small, right? I mean, it's
No.
there, right?
And
There's
it's huge on the server side of the house. It's
right.
not so huge on the like consumer side of the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
It's fairly large on the embedded side. Um, but what's fascinating is that, even despite all the traction and momentum in Linux, like if you go out and you buy a laptop at a Best Buy or wherever, there's no option preloaded Linux. It's like, here's the Windows. Have a nice
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
Um,
Nobody's gonna. Well, but imagine the pressure Linux would have if they had that many users. Today, Linux gets the advantage of having the best users. Like,
yeah.
if you
Oh,
have a
yeah.
Linux desktop, you're a pretty good user. It's not your grandmother, right?
Yes.
It's not my mom who's taking a call from someone who says your Windows aren't working, kind of thing, right?
Right. Right.
Very sophisticated user base. I often wonder how well Linux would hold up under the pressure of consumers, and then not just on day one, but the consumer demand to add this and add that and make this work. And can it be that way? Then, and I also wonder, Microsoft has a culture with Windows of always trying to, they're always monkeying with it. You're like,
Yeah.
let it be. It's fine. But no, we gotta, we're chasing something on that. So I don't know. Both with Mac and with Linux. I wonder if they had that intense consumer pressure.
Hmm.
On the Mac side, they've just said, we don't care. You'll take what we give you. Linux
It's
has
worked
a
for
very
them.
sophisticated consumer base, right? So I don't know.
It's interesting though too how that culture has been promoted, right? So if you think about Windows, the way it got propagated the way it did was all of these OEM vendor relationships that are very hard to, you know,
Yeah.
dismember, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a mutual thing going on, right?
Right. Right.
Um, then you look at Mac, where I really think of them as a design company, right? And it's the whole experience. It's how the software interacts with the hardware and the quality of the hardware and the design and the aesthetic, but also the performance and the usability. And so, to your point, they're going to do whatever the hell it is they want to do with Mac, and you're either going to buy it because you love it, or you're just going to steer clear of it. And Mac doesn't have an OEM problem because it's run on Apple hardware or run nowhere. So that is fundamentally a different delivery model. And then you have Linux, which is run on anything you want for free, wherever you want. And what's interesting about Linux is that they in a certain manner speaking are vendor locked in the other direction. What I mean by that is all your common consumer software is compiled for Mac and for Windows. So you get an executable or a DMG you can install, but no one's like, here's your Linux APK to go make your Quicken software work. And so
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I'm sure I've talked in old shows about like the Wine HQ project and basically being able to have a window. It's basically a Windows emulation engine that it's not a VM or anything like that, but it's an emulator engine that gets installed in Linux that allows you to run native Windows applications in
Yeah.
Linux. And that takes a tremendous amount of work to do that. And it's, it's a fun community project, and they've had different levels of success with different software over the years. But that's fundamentally different than being kind of a native first class software ecosystem, if you will. And so, um, you're not going to get Microsoft Office for Linux. You're going to get open office, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be just that level of difference that it's a hard hill to climb for some people that are going to be very set in kind of those household names of software that they're accustomed to working with.
And there isn't much left on the native side, just to be honest. I mean, there are some big native applications, but we've all moved. There's 1,000 phone applications. This reminds me of the day when you'd walk into Best Buy and all the crapware would line the walls, right? Today that's in a store on your phone, right? But I think on both Mac and Windows. I don't know about Linux because I don't run that here. I probably should. I did for a while, and every time I go to Linux, I run it for a couple weeks. I'm like, why? I just right. You get to that point, but we're so web based now. I think for most people, they just don't even think about the browser has become the platform, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So most of the folks we're talking to know that. So, well, Christian, thanks for that's a good topic. We spent a lot of time with you on Cyber Frontiers before talking about security, and I think it's a good way to kind of wrap the show here. Although I got one more thing for you, but wrap the show thinking through that from a critical perspective, and then just with a little hindsight, right?
Yeah.
It's been a month or two, I think, since we went through that. So Christian, we're going to have you back on here as we get closer to December, because the 14th anniversary of Home Gadget Geeks is coming up. I always have you back for that show. But there may be some new gadgets that you might be looking at here in the future. Anything you're interested? Have you taken a new interest in any new gadgets?
Yeah. I'm entering the whole new world of Baby Tech podcast as we're 12 weeks along with our first. And so, thank you. We're very excited. And that means that I've immediately started applying the Home Gadget methodology to child birth and the whole 9 yards. So I have a long laundry list of gadgets that are pretty exciting and fascinating at how excited we are to be excited about the gadgets. So we could have a whole show.
There's a lot you can do. Yeah, there's a lot you can do. There's a lot you can obsess about. It has gotten everybody's kind of checking in the chat room saying congratulations. There's a lot I think about. I mean, my oldest is 35, so there were very few gadgets, even the advent of the baby monitor, that went from audio to really crappy video to really good video to now 4K. Watch your kids in 4K in the room, and maybe even an assistant to
crazy stuff.
Super
crazy.
Do things for you. Well, congratulations to going back to the John's original comment. We watched you graduate from high school. We watched you graduate from college. We watched you get married and buy that house that you're in right now. And now for your first child on the way, we wish you the best and all the health and all those things that have to go on. But most of all, it's a lifelong commitment of just raising these kids that sometimes are awesome and sometimes are not so awesome.
Yeah.
We had my oldest, his birthday's in September, and we had him over the first of the month, Labor Day weekend. We did a cocktails and cigar night here on the deck for him.
Nice.
It was
Yeah.
just anybody who wanted to do that, and he was going to have a second party for the rest of the family. And then I said it was supposed to be tomorrow. I was like, "Hey, what time is that party tomorrow?" "Oh, we're not having it." I was like, "What do you mean you're not having it?" "Yeah, we just decided not to have it." And I'm like, "Well, why?" "Well, we're just not." And I was like, "Oh, maybe there's something going on there. I should probably not poke the bear
Yeah.
too much on that one." You never stop raising these kids, but they are a blast, and it is a ton of fun. So we'll as we check in with you in December, part of the conversation will maybe be around some of the tech, some more specific tech you're thinking about going into this thing. This puts the due date January, February,
March 25th.
March. Okay. So
Yeah.
you got a ways to go. You got a ways to go. I am interested. I would always tell new parents, you can tell how many kids parents have by the size of the diaper bag. And the very first diaper bag, giant suitcase on wheels. It had everything. You could take a small tactical nuclear explosion. There would be things in there to cover that, right? You could fend off bears, and it could float across the water. You were ready for everything. Second one, about half that. Third one, maybe just a small bag. Fourth one, a few less things. By our fifth, we carried a onesie, a diaper, and a little container with like 3 wipes in it. And that's all, like the absolute minimum.
That's all you
So,
need. Travel
yeah,
light, go far. Yeah.
yeah. So it's you kind of start weeding things out in the process, but it's a ton of fun. Well, congratulations, you got a lot ahead for you. I hope Marine's doing well and continues to do well. She's got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Just make sure you're there to support her, because
100%.
you don't have any work to do. You're
100%.
off the
Well,
hook for a good chunk of it.
yeah. Yeah. Right on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just celebrate that with her. Just do what she says.
Yeah.
From a guy who's done a bunch. Don't think you know anything. Just do what she tells you to do.
You got it.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else, Christian, before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's a good wrap.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you. Excited to see 14 years of Home Gadget Geeks coming up as well, and celebrate that with you. A couple reminders on the way out. If you want to, in honor of Christian being a new dad, if you want to leave a dad joke for us, maybe we could start collecting some dad jokes for you. Head out to homegadgetgeeks.com. There's a microphone button out there, and it allows you with 30-second
Oh, nice.
30-second recorded messages. You can click on that. And let me encourage you, click on that, leave a good dad joke for Christian. He's going to need some of these. We'll have him back in December, maybe play some of them on the show. Again, homegadgetgeeks.com. There's a blue microphone icon bottom right. I think that's still there. Leave that voicemail, or you can send me a voicemail, jim@theaverageguy.tv. We'll play those on the show when he comes back here in December. And we got to get some good dad jokes. You can't listen. You have to have an arsenal. You have to have them ready to
I
go.
have
Right?
a note on my phone that I've started with some of my originals. So yeah, you're correct.
Did Gary have some good dad jokes? I'm sure he had to be
Daily.
the king.
Dale. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
he had to be the king of dad jokes. I bet
He's where I've learned all that skill
he,
from.
he had some good ones. Yeah, some good advice coming in. Joe, by the way, Joe says, congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks,
Tony says, get your sleep now.
yeah.
Jim says, best dad jokes are puns.
100%.
That is true. Do you get any? Will you get any paternity leave for this? Have you checked that out already?
Yeah. So that's a fortunate part of Amazon, is that there's 6 weeks of paternity leave, which is pretty awesome.
Nice.
So
Wow,
I'll
that's
take that.
generous.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll
Take
probably
it.
split. Yeah.
Definitely take it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll probably split that up in half, and that'll probably be an awesome respite from a second title that's new this year, effective October 1st, I will start my journey as a principal engineer at Amazon.
Oh, nice. Congratulations
Yeah,
on that
thank
as
you.
well.
So,
Excellent.
principal engineering community is a really kind of cool environment and part of kind of what makes the crazy bread and butter of all these different startup type teams kind of all working together in a large company. And so
That's
it's
awesome.
certainly a really awesome opportunity. So I'm very excited for that. But I will be also
Cool.
very excited to have some time off
Yeah.
in
No, you'll
between
need it.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Don't be a hero. It's she
exactly.
needs you. You need you. You need the time off. Take as much as you can take because you never get it back. In those first,
Yeah.
those first 8 to 12 weeks are super busy. You're figuring things out. You're figuring out what you're going to want to do and who you want to be and how you want to start this journey. Then I imagine, if you do childcare, that's going to be the next step in that. How does that work? And some of
Mhm.
those kinds of things. So definitely take the time. Take the time. Speaking of taking the time, the average guy.tv platform, both web and media hosting, still powered.
Still doing it.
Still,
Still
still
doing it.
powered. Maple Grove Partners get secure, reliable, high speed hosting from people that you know and trust. For more information, visit maplegrovepartners.com. And you can kind of do just about anything over there, right? I mean, for the most part,
Yeah.
you're really good at hosting podcast stuff, but just about any hosting available out there. And Christian does it right. So appreciate Maple Grove Partners and their long time. And when I say long time, I mean from the very beginning,
Yeah.
host of Home Gadget
Very
Geeks.
beginning.
Used to be Home Tech back in the day. We are live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, out here at the averageguy.tv/live. Love to have you out. Marv B will be my guest next week. He'll be jumping in. Dan Lefebvre is coming out. He's got the Elgato teleprompter that he wants to talk about, which would be kind of cool.
Nice.
The question will kind of be, do we need a teleprompt-like device for everything? Like we think we use those for podcasting, but in meetings and some of those kinds of things, is keeping eye contact important? We're recording more and more things these days. Is certainly we've gotten better microphones over the years. Do we need better cameras and teleprompters? So Dan will come on and talk about that. And then I've rescheduled Uyghur for October 10th. He'll be back to fill us in as well. So that'll be awesome. Those are some shows coming up. Love to have you join us live. If you're listening to the recording, come out Thursday night, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, theaverageguy.tv/live. Love to have you here. Christian, again, thanks for coming out. To those of you listening live, thanks for coming out. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Good night.
All right, it's late in Christian's time zone. I'm going to let you live folks go. No post show tonight. I got a few things for Christian, and then we're going to see you guys back here next week. Same time, Marv B will be here, and thanks for coming out. To John, Joe, Jim, Tony. I think I saw Ken a little bit earlier. Thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Always good
Thanks,
to
Phil.
see you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Take it easy.